Welcome to the debate. So today we're going to be examining one of the most, I think, pervasive concepts in aesthetic history, the tension between absolute presence and total absence, between density and the void.
Right.
This conflict is often encapsulated by that Latin phrase horror vacui, the fear of empty space, which drives this impulse to fill every available surface with detail.
Exactly. And that fear, or, well, maybe we should call it an impulse, it spans so far beyond just visual art. It really dictates design choices, architectural philosophies, even psychological reactions, all of which we see in the source material. It's a fundamental thing that shapes reality itself.
So the central question we have to address then is this. Does the cultural significance of an object, a text, or even a concept derive primarily from the dense detail of its composition, reflecting that universal tendency to, fill the void?
Or is genuine meaning located in the strategic use and interpretation of the empty spaces that are revealed or created?
A perfect summary.
Well, I'm going to contend that dense composition, that impulse to fill space, is a vital, intentional cultural strategy. It provides structure, it provides definition, and it actively shapes both our aesthetic worlds and our psychological reality.
And I'll be arguing for the opposing view, that true critical insight, that spiritual depth and intellectual discovery, they're found precisely in the conceptual potential of the void, the gap, that moment of deliberate absence. When I look for genuine intellectual value, I find it residing outside the filled frame. It's in that critical moment of rupture, of indeterminacy that absence creates.
And this isn't just an artistic preference, it's a pedagogical necessity. Take, for instance, the use of collage in teaching. Critical awareness doesn't just come from absorbing this overwhelming visual culture. It emerges within the silent, empty gaps between the fragments of the collage. Those deliberate spaces, they force the student to step back, to synthesize disparate pieces, and to critique the very knowledge or consumerism they're absorbing.
So the meaning is in the space between.
Exactly. We see the same intellectual challenge in literature. Think about Gustave Flaubert's unfinished masterpiece, Bouvard et Pécuchet. He deliberately uses textual tedium, repetition, and these gaps in the narrative connection to demand the reader's full active participation. Flaubert forces the reader to confront the void of knowledge itself, fundamentally revising what a novel should be by making the reader complete that intellectual circuit.
Okay, and this elevation of absence, it's not exclusively a Western idea. Eastern philosophies, especially Taoism, frame emptiness in a very positive light. The concept of wuji, often translated as non-ultimate, represents the undifferentiated, limitless potential from which all existence emerges. It embodies the absence of distinct form, the ultimate void that contains everything. Modernism and minimalism inherited this understanding, prioritizing simplicity and recognizing that strategic white space, well, it isn't wasted space.
I absolutely understand the allure of that unburdened space, I do. But focusing only on the gap risks dismissing the sheer power and the intention behind the impulse to structure and adorn. The phenomenon of dense composition it's a dominant aesthetic reality across incredibly diverse cultures, and it often serves these profound metaphysical or social needs.
But is it just a need, or is it a fear?
Well, let's start with the label itself. When we use a term like horror vacui, we're imposing an external, somewhat negative judgment, aren't we? We're suggesting that intricate pattern is born solely out of a primitive fear. But in many contexts, let's take Islamic art, the intense ornamentation is better understood not as fear management, but as a comprehensive decorative system. Some have even linked it to a textile aesthetic, where surfaces are treated like richly woven fabrics. The goal is to fill the surfaces of mosques or objects with intricate calligraphy and designs to reflect the very completeness of the divine word. And the idea that, philosophically, there is no space, no emptiness, no void or desolation on earth that is truly void. The density reflects totality. Even psychologically, as Lacan observed when he was discussing Pascal, the avoidance of emptiness can stem from a very deep-seated anxiety, countering a horror of desire. So in this light, density is a necessary psychological shield. It is a very intentional aesthetic choice.
My issue with celebrating the void as the primary source of meaning is that it sidesteps the undeniable visual evidence. I mean, the fact of density is still there, regardless of the baggage that comes with the term horror vacui.
Let's stick with Islamic art for a moment. The aesthetic aim there wasn't just to cover a surface. It was to manage profound complexity and to create richly decorated surfaces through these masterful structural and tile schemes.
Right.
And this mastery is crucial because the concept of mythal, which means similitude or parable, is realized visually through the multiplicity and range of geometric patterns. The pattern itself, through its infinite repetition and variation, becomes the visual parable. It reflects unity through diversity. So the filling of the space is the intentional communication mechanism. It demonstrates control, order, comprehensiveness. It's difficult to argue the void is paramount when the aesthetic itself is so meticulously constructed to defy and overcome emptiness.
That's a powerful argument for intentionality and structure. I'll grant you that. But I think we need to examine what that intentionality actually achieves in the viewer's experience. I'm not convinced that reducing this complex patterning to just a geometric parable fully captures its function. In fact, many scholars argue that this density creates a radically different kind of engagement, one that fosters a different type of void, perhaps even a productive one.
A productive void? How so?
This aesthetic density is often described as reflecting haptic space and abstract line. To clarify, haptic refers to sensation or perception related to touch or the body's movement. By creating an overwhelming density of non-figurative design, the art bypasses a simple visual reading. It engages the viewer sensorily. You feel the space. You're enveloped by it. Okay, this process resists the subordination of the form to a single prescribed narrative or meaning. The sheer complexity paradoxically encourages what's called a moment of freedom. It floods the senses to the point where the mind gives up trying to linearly decode it, which forces a nonverbal, non-representational response. So the aesthetic of filling here is so complete that it creates an intellectual gap, a space of interpretive freedom within the visual field itself. And if we accept that density is a powerful intentional strategy, as you've argued with the concept of mythal, then we have to ask, what are the social and political implications when that power is deployed by controlling institutions?
Okay.
The obsession with filling space often serves ideological or commercial goals that are, well, they're decidedly restrictive, not liberating. Look at the Middle Ages. Horror vacui was explicitly enforced by the church on manuscript illustrators. They were instructed to fill empty spaces with canonical images. The goal was to prevent free associations that might deflect their faith toward worldly thoughts. The physical act of filling was quite literally an act of theological control, of censorship, blocking the mental gaps where heresy or independent thought might take root.
A fair point.
Similarly, look at maximalism in contemporary interior design. Its intense density often functions as a visual manifestation of prestige, of consumption and material status. It suggests affluence more than a purely aesthetic motivation. The filling signals not only order, but also ownership.
I agree that institutional power weaponizes density, but that fact only underscores its fundamental effectiveness as a cultural strategy. I mean, if the intentional use of density is employed by entities as powerful as the church or the state, that proves its efficacy in defining and disseminating meaning across an entire population.
But a restrictive meaning, wouldn't you say?
It can be, yes, but its effectiveness is the point. We see this so clearly in the Spanish Baroque. Institutions like the monarchy and the Catholic Church used cultural expedients, pervasive images, overwhelming ornament to achieve specific, conservative social and political effects. This density, filling every possible architectural and visual space, reached potentially all subjects, becoming a powerful form of mass culture. It wasn't just decoration, it was a mechanism for defining social and spiritual structure.
And if we turn to a modern context, this whole debate about filling space is extremely practical. In digital design, the absence of clean, strategic, empty space leads directly to information overload. When everything is dense, nothing is functional. The message fails. The need to manage the filling to ensure it's functional and organized reinforces that density. When utilized masterfully, is an essential tool for effective communication and for defining order. I still find myself resistant to this idea that ultimate value lies in the void, when historically, intellectual inquiry itself has struggled so mightily against the very possibility of absolute emptiness. This resistance to the void, it isn't merely a cultural preference, it's rooted in natural philosophy.
You're talking about Aristotle.
Of course, we have to consider Aristotle. He fundamentally refuted the existence of a true vacuum. And why? Because he defined a body as that which has extension in 3 dimensions. If space is truly empty, it would lack definition, making empty space a contradiction in terms, a space that exists without existing. The difficulty in conceiving of a pure void, whether it's imagined as a lightning agent or motionless space, this has been a continuous philosophical problem for millennia. It suggests that nature itself, in its definitional form, resists absolute emptiness. If the greatest minds struggle to even define the void, how can we rely on it as the bedrock of meaning?
I appreciate the weight of Aristotelian thought, I do, but I'm not convinced that the philosophical challenges posed by ancient physics can negate the productive potential of the void today, because the void we discuss now isn't simply nothingness.
Go on.
While modern physics uses the concept of the quantum vacuum, which is not a quiescent void at all, but a dynamic field filled with fluctuating energy and virtual particles, it is the very ground of possibility. And culturally, psychologically, the void is equally dynamic. Think about the high place phenomenon, sometimes called the call of the void.
Ah, yes.
That sudden, brief urge to jump when you're standing on a great height. This is interpreted by some not as a morbid desire to die, but as an immediate, visceral survival instinct that paradoxically affirms the urge to live by forcing us to confront that boundary between existence and non-existence. So the void, though it can be alarming, becomes essential for deep reflection and creative production. The psychological void is where we process information and generate new thought. We contrast the noise of aesthetic horror vacui with the quiet, necessary fullness of just seeing things as they are. The gap isn't terrifying, it's the place where potential resides. I remain committed to the idea that the most fertile ground for critical understanding really lies in the conceptual gaps. The ambiguities in language, the silences in music, the negative spaces that define a composition. It is in the absence of prescribed information or ornamentation that critique is made possible. It forces us to engage actively, allowing us to truly imagine new possibilities beyond the given material reality.
And while the conceptual void undoubtedly challenges and provokes us, the evidence shows a persistent, powerful impulse across cultures and time periods to structure, to utilize, and to master density. Whether through complex geometric patterns that manage visual complexity, or maximalist design reflecting social status, or that pervasive Baroque rhetoric intended to define order, the aesthetic of filling space is a rich, intentional, and historically necessary mechanism for conveying, maintaining, and defending cultural order and metaphysical belief.
So, we've illuminated the ways that both presence and absence, filling and void, are active ingredients in aesthetic and intellectual inquiry.
Absolutely. Showing that complexity demands we appreciate the powerful, divergent forces that are driving both creation and interpretation.